Hello everybody and happy 4th of July. In today's Trash Panda video, we're going to talk about a very, very long story that started way back in 2020 about a missing Air Force aircraft and a missing crew and a very long road to discovery and conclusion. So let's travel way back in time to November 21st of 2020. Rusty gets some numbers from a fisherman, a scalloper, another diver, somebody gets some numbers from somebody where allegedly in the 80s a scalloper pulled up a bronze cannon. It's two sets of numbers. Guy can't remember which ones. Whatever. Well, we're interested because bronze cannons usually mean gold, silver, something. If there's bronze cannons, there's other things. So November 21st, 2020, me and Rusty and Andrew go out there. We're going to find this wreck. We dump Andrew on the first set of numbers. He swims around for a while. Nothing. Darkness, sand, nada. Move over to the second set of numbers. I jump in. Here's some video from the dive. Again, you run your reel out, you do a circle, you run your reel out some more, you do a bigger circle. Nothing. Sand, dark, nada. No cannons, no gold, no pirate swords, none of that.
Where's the fucking cannons?
Just sand.
Nothing?
Oh, look.
Any fish?
No.
So our hopes and dreams are dashed of finding billions in sunken treasure. Gonna put the boat up for the winter and figure out where to go from here. Over the winter, Rusty reaches out to a guy, Ben, who does a lot of side scan stuff. I can't show you the side scan because I didn't get his permission. But let's just say there's not a lot to see. Ben goes out there, side scans for us. There's like a little bit of lump here, a little bit of lump there. But he kind of throws some fuel in the fire. He says, yeah, it really does look like a low-lying colonial era wreck. So now we're really fired up. So come springtime, we get back out there. June 25th, 2021. We go back out and we are going to find cannons.
We're gonna get fucking cannons today.
So we dump Rusty and John on the wreck. I think it was me and Pat and Tim on the surface, and we're all waiting to see cannons. We want to hear them. We're getting impatient, and we can't take it anymore. So we send a slate down on the line while they're decompressing, and it says, well, where's the fucking cannons? And on the slate, they write plane and draw us a picture in case we can't read. So now we're sitting on the surface, and we see this plane. Okay, well, what do you mean by a plane? How do you know it's a plane? Is it a big plane? Is it a little plane? Anyway, we're dying up here, and we still got to wait, I don't know, whatever it was, 45 minutes for them to decompress. So they come up and they say, yes, it's an airplane. There's stuff laying all over the place. So naturally, in we go. Let's investigate and see what is down here. We gear up. We jump in. We scoot down to 160 feet of water, and here's what we find. Lots of stuff. Wire, aluminum, just goofy looking things. But it's everywhere. It's strewn out everywhere. There's like a life raft there on the right hand side. You can see pieces of fabric. Everywhere you look, there's wire. It just almost looks like maybe a trash barge. Maybe this is one of those reefing projects where they dumped airplanes in all over the country for reefing and to get rid of them. We just can't figure out what we're looking at. And then you got these straps and cables. It's really just bizarre. We're trying to really figure out what it is that we're looking at. Now, important note here, you'll see scallops, and in some places you'll see tracks. The scallopers have been running this wreck over for 50 years. I mean, on the regular. They just plow over this thing and drag everything off everywhere. So, regardless of what condition this was in when this either crashed or was thrown off a barge, we don't know yet. But whatever condition it was in the day it hit bottom, it has been just mangled by scallop dredges, probably since the day after it sank. So I believe that's part of the reason that it's just so strewn out like this. And I mean, as far as you can swim in every direction, there's just stuff like this. So put yourself in our heads at the time. Here we are. They say it's an airplane. Okay, it makes sense. There's all this wire. There's all this, we can't figure out what it is that we're seeing. We start finding little bigger pieces of aluminum. And you can see here's just a big chunk of stuff just laying here. Like it exploded. I think every time the scallopers run it over, that more stuff is drug up to the surface. I think whatever happened to begin with was pretty violent. But we're very confused at this point. We don't really know what we're seeing. So we come up, we steam back to Cape May. We call Ben. Ben, so there's no cannons. We're not rich. Don't quit your day job. But there's an airplane here. Was there any reefing projects done out here? Was there any airplanes that pushed off the carrier or airplanes that crashed in an accident? Let us know what you can find, because he's really good at research. He does a bunch of research and he comes back and he says, well, there's 2 C-133 cargo masters missing out of Dover, Delaware. One in 62, one in 63. That were never found. I had been in aviation nut my whole life. I had never heard of a C-133 my entire life. So you get the Google box out, you look it up. C-133 was the first turboprop cargo plane built by the Air Force. It was built with the sole purpose of hauling ICBMs to Europe through the Azores. They would fly out of Dover with all kinds of cargo, but again, airplane was designed to haul ICBMs. There was no testing done on this airplane. As far as, a prototype went, and they flew missiles and cargo all over the world, namely ICBMs, to Europe through the Azore Islands. They would stop in the Azores to refuel. So, okay, there's 2 C-133s missing. Can we prove that this may be one of those, or is this still something else entirely that was dumped there on purpose? There's no mystery. There's no nothing. What are we looking at? So 4th of July weekend, 2021, we go back out. We're going to prove this one way or the other. We got to prove it's something or it's nothing, and it's not worth investigating. So left to right, Gene and Dan, myself, Rusty, Pat, Brian, John, we load up and we're going to go figure this thing out. We go out there. I think we all did 2 dives, bring some stuff up. We've got to investigate it. We got to look at it. We got to see what we got. I think everybody did 2 dives. I think Gene and Dan's mustaches partnered up for 1 dive, though, and I think they did 3 apiece. So we bring all this stuff to the surface. We're going to solve this mystery. It's a little bit deep to be messing around down there. We bring everything up. We bring it back to the dock. We start looking at things. Here's what we find. Of all the things that we could have found on the bottom, John finds the throttle quadrant, which distinguishes it as a C-133 cargo master. I think Tim found the oxygen mask. We said, oh, it's Air Force. Okay. There's the throttle quadrant. Compare it all you want, left to right there. It's from a C-133. Okay. Well, that's great, and it's awful. It's great. We know what we're looking at. It is not a reefed airplane. It is not a civilian airplane. This is a military aircraft that is missing in action from Dover, which poses a real problem. In addition to the throttle quadrant, there were a bunch of these parts that were like wrapped in plastic, had caps on them. We had this really interesting ring here, which we later discover is from the center of the engine. Here's a picture of it on a T-34 turboprop engine at Dover. We'll get to more of that later, but this just further confirms this is definitely a C-133 that we're looking at. And like I said, that's a real problem, and at this point for us, and it's a problem because both these aircraft that are missing out of Dover were never found. The crew was never found. This is a grave site. This is a sunken military vessel. This is no. We're bad boys right now until we can figure out what we're going to do next. So what we do is Rusty called everybody he could think of. Hey, we found this airplane. We're sure that it's one of these missing airplanes. We need to talk to somebody. We need to notify them. We don't want to be, in trouble. We can put this stuff back on the bottom of the ocean where we found it, whatever. Somebody get a hold of us and tell us what we should do. I think Rusty called the Coast Guard, the Navy. Certainly at some point we called Eric. Eric has some government contacts. We said, Eric, can you get a hold of somebody that can help us out here? Long story short, Eric gets a hold of one of his contacts, gets a hold of somebody at Dover Air Force Base. We finally get a call back, or I believe it was an email back. Very obviously, at first, they think we're crazy. They think we found a water heater at the bottom of the ocean, and here we are saying we found this missing aircraft. We sent them some pictures of these artifacts here that I've documented as well, and they realized that we were very serious and that we did find something. So we organized a meeting at Dover, and me and Eric and Ben and John and Rusty all went over to Dover on August 18th, 2021. They rolled out the red carpet for us. We went and had a meeting with those guys. I think originally half the contingent thought we were a bunch of grave-robbing scumbags, and I can understand why they would think that. But by the time we were done with our meeting there, I think that we were all on the same page. They understood where we got to. We were trying to identify this. For all we knew, it was junk that somebody put there on purpose. We weren't trying to disturb a gravesite. We weren't trying to mess with the military property. None of that stuff. I think by the end of the meeting, they realized that. Agreed that we had found a C-133, but we couldn't determine which one. Let's remember there are two missing out of Dover. So, documented all the artifacts extremely well. That's a lot of these pictures you see here. And then we turned the artifacts over to the Air Force. So we could kind of try to wash our hands of that end of things. We don't need trouble with the Air Force. We weren't trying to be disrespectful. We were just trying to solve the mystery. So let's take a look here. There are two missing aircraft out of Dover. Serial number 2002 took off out of Dover on September 22nd, 1963 on the way to the Azores. Last communication was at 2:59. No wreckage was ever found. Sonar searches failed to locate the aircraft. It was carrying 48,645 pounds of general cargo. Second one, or I should say really the first one, 1611, took off May 27th, 1962. Destination was the Azores. Wreckage was found for that one, floating on the surface approximately 22 hours after disappearance. It was carrying 50,000 pounds of classified cargo. We'll get to more of that later. So now we have the two possibilities here. I, for one, have to figure out which one it is. I can't leave it alone. Luckily, Ben was of the same mind. Ben emails us and says, guys, I sent a FOIA request for the accident investigation files on both aircraft. Let's take a look at those and see if we can narrow anything down. So now we're armed with the accident investigation reports, which we'll dive into more later. But turns out they both left over. They were both on their way to the Azores. They were both flying the same route, and both lost communication around the same time, which means, within 5-6 minutes of each other, which means that doesn't help. we could still be looking at either aircraft, and they were identical aircraft. So, while very interesting, and we'll see why here in a little bit, we still cannot narrow down which aircraft this may have been. All we have is the photos that we have taken of the artifacts. We cannot retrieve any more artifacts for obvious reasons. We revisit the wreck a few times over the next 2 years just to swim over and see if the dredges have dragged anything up. Like if we can find an engine laying on the bottom, we can get a serial number off the engine. We know which aircraft it was. So given all of that, this has now turned into a research project. We can't recover any more artifacts. We don't want to recover any more artifacts. All we have to go on is what we have. So I said, okay, let's go through Douglas's records. Well, the short version is there aren't any. Douglas was bought, it became McDonnell Douglas, and then Boeing bought McDonnell Douglas. The records just don't exist anymore. There was a fire at some point at one of the Douglas factories or something. They lost a bunch of records. We can't get any more records than we already have, period. It's just not happening. We reached out to the historical curator at Boeing, and we're not getting any more than we have. So let's take a look at the accident/incident report here from the Air Force. I'm going to kind of go through a little bit quick, or we'll be here all day. Feel free to pause on any of this stuff. But here's the incident report for 562002. We have the crew, history of flight, exactly what happened. They were tracking it. Probable cause: loss of elevator control resulting from disturbed airflow across the wing center section. This disturbed airflow probably resulted from destruction or distortion of the wing fuselage fillet by a low-grade explosion in the fillet area or damage inflicted by a separated propeller or blade. So they're speculating that possibly a propeller came off, struck the fuselage. These aircraft did have some trouble with the pitch control in the propellers. This will come into play more later because they didn't, at this point in time, only a few of these airplanes have crashed. Ultimately, by the end of their service, 10 out of 50 of them crashed. So they're speculating, without complete information just because of time. We're going to talk more about that later. But again, feel free to pause on any of this and read it. Ignition source, possible sabotage, which they say is not likely, etc., etc. They also talk about 1611 in here. But again, we're just going to go through here, talking about possible if a life raft was released in flight. They're just speculating. Multiple engine failure. That's an important one too to consider. Multiple engine failure, and we're going to come talk about that some more later. These engines were the first turboprops introduced to the Air Force for these airplanes, and they had a lot of trouble, and they were running those engines really, really hard. And we're going to look at the TBO on those engines. We're going to look at how often these things were overhauled. There's a lot of things that lend itself to an engine problem with 2002 or 1611, or both. But this is all we have to work on at this point to try to determine which aircraft we're looking at. We just have the incident reports to go through, see what the Air Force was thinking. They're not stupid. See what they come up with. Maybe there's a clue in here. It turns out there is. But maybe there's a clue in here that can point to which aircraft it was. Here's all the pilots' hours and stuff. They were extremely experienced. That wasn't likely an issue. Let's look at the engine total hours here. So we have 4 engines on this aircraft. This engine has a total of 3,300 hours on it, and it's had 5 major overhauls in those 3,300 hours. This engine's got 2,700 hours total time on it, 3 major overhauls in 2,700. 100 hours, 2 major overhauls, and engine number 4, 1,300 hours with 3 major overhauls in that time. That's a lot. So my strictly opinion is that there's a possibility that they were running these engines pretty hard. I think this aircraft was a little bit underpowered. I think they were at low speed climb, high angle of attack. The engines are running at full throttle. You don't have the cooling that you would normally have. At cruise power, you're going to back that engine down. It's not going to run as hot. I think there's something to this. The Air Force did too, as you'll see later on here. But I think there's something to be said about the engines. So continuing on, I know we're having some audio cut in and out, but I can't seem to do anything about it. So we're just going to keep powering through here. A lot of this stuff, individual flight records, we don't need to go through that. We already saw, kind of pilot's total time. We can skip a bunch of this stuff. We're not here to second guess pilots. That's for sure. Here's everybody that was assigned to the incident report. This was the route of flight filed by the captain. They leave Dover, they go to Sea Isle of Vortac, and then from there they go to the Shad intersection. Now, a lot of these pilots called the Shad intersection the Shad monster because they said if they could make it to the Shad intersection, they felt like the rest of the flight would go fine, which again, I think lends itself to this engine issue. They were high power settings, low speed. So if they could get to altitude and back down to cruise power with more speed, more cooling, etc., I think they're again, strictly opinion. It just kind of lends itself to that. Here's the weight and balance of 2002. They were ultimately, their takeoff weight was 271,000 pounds and some change. So that's very heavy for a 4-engine turboprop aircraft. Here's the communications. So we have all the times in Zulu over here on the left, and then all the communications with the aircraft. Again, feel free to pause anywhere in here. Everything was kind of routine here. They're giving them squawk codes. They're handing them off after takeoff as they proceed here with New York Center. They're having a little bit of radio trouble, hard to kind of make them out. Not uncommon for the 60s, everybody. Not uncommon for the transponder to not be working quite right. Not uncommon for the radio to be not working great. Again, here, very weak, very weak. Would you recycle this? Code 11 over, Roger, recycling. So they're having some trouble communicating. No sign of issue at this point. And here we have the last radio communication. Report reaching 14,000 feet. So he's between Sea Isle of Vortac and the Shad intersection now. And his next job is to report in at 14,000 feet. So that was at 06:58 and 55 seconds. 07:04 and 10 seconds. New York is trying to reach them. They cannot. And that is the end of radio communication with 2002. This is the log from, I think one was the log from Dover, one was the log from New York, but they all say the same things. Here we have more crew stuff. Here's the weather, if anybody's interested in that at the time. Route of flight, weather, 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 weather. So this is what we have to go off of for 2002. Again, I think we're looking at, we're still looking at weather, route of flight. This is what is interesting. This is, the Air Force was looking at this. Remember I talked before about maybe they suspected something with engines too. So these are the accidents with C-133s up to this point and their known flight path. So as you can see, they think there may be a correlation here too. So 1, 2, 3, 4 crashes all happened between 28 minutes after takeoff and 38 minutes after takeoff. So at this point in time, remember, not all of these airplanes that are going to crash have crashed yet. But at this point in time, 4 aircraft have crashed between 28 minutes and 38 minutes after takeoff, indicating, again, something is weird. Here's 1611 right here, which is the other aircraft that we were talking about. That crashed 33 minutes after takeoff. Here's 2002, 28 minutes after takeoff. And this is going to help. This is one of the things that helped us. Okay, so 2002 was 28 minutes. 1611 was 32 minutes after takeoff. Depending on the route of flight, airspeeds, etc., we still can't rule out either aircraft. Now, if one had been 28 minutes and one had been 48 minutes, we can say, okay, 1611 would have been further away by this time. But again, we're searching desperately for some information that could point towards one aircraft or another. Now, we are leaning towards, Ben is leaning towards it being 2002. I'm leaning towards it being 2002. The squadron historian from Dover is also speculating that it's 2002. Based on where debris was found from 1611, it wasn't really feasible for it to have come from the location of 2002, but we can't prove anything. And lastly, here is the sonar search area that the Air Force searched for 2002. All right, let's take a look at the incident report for 1611 now. Here was the crew on board. There was 6 crewmen on board this. James Allen Higgins, Robert John Fowler, Danny Hawkins, William Francis Wirt, Fred Parsons, Clifford Edward Parker. 1611, let's forget, was the year before 2002. So they have a little less to go on. You see in 2002's incident report, they're talking about 1611 a little bit. They don't really have as much to go on, a year prior. So here we got crew, C-133A. Okay. Let's go through pilots, time in type, instrument, etc. History of flight for 1611. Aircraft was unloaded. 50,000 pounds of cargo at Norton Air Force Base in California was flown to Dover, arriving 27 May 1962. Aircraft was cleared IFR to Lahays, if I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong, via direct sea aisle. Then Shad intersection. So you see the Shad intersection coming up again. So Sea Isle Vortac, from there to the Shad intersection. Interesting to note, 95,500 pounds of fuel on board when they took off. 27th of May, 1962. Primary cause. This one's going to read a little different. And again, I'm going to keep moving. Feel free to pause. This one reads a little different because, again, they don't have as many accidents to compare notes to. So this one reads a little bit different. Insufficient evidence available from recovered debris. Remember, 1611, they found debris. We plotted that debris on a map that I'll show you later. And we can set the set and drift of this debris to try to determine where the debris originated. Again, trying to differentiate. Can we use this to determine which aircraft we're looking at? Circumstantial, certainly, but doesn't lend itself. So, again, they're talking about structural failure, loss of flight control systems. You can feel free to pause anywhere in here. They're talking about nose cone failures. Again, remember, this is a little bit familiar. Propeller failure. Again, there was issues with the pitch control in these propellers. Whether or not it ever caused an accident, I'm not sure anybody knows. Lightning strike. Hatches, again, they're talking about side cargo door, crew entrance door, life raft hatches, and life rafts. That was something that we talked about with 2002 also. Autopilot fuel contamination, floor beam failure, etc. They're ruling out a lot of things, but fuel leaks, wing spark cracks. But this one reads a little bit different because they didn't have as much information to go on. Let's look at this again. We're talking about engines again. Okay, so let's look at the engines here. It's not laid out the same as the other one, but here we have, I don't know which engine number it is. Anyway, we got the T34-17 or T34-P7WA engines. This will become more relevant later. 1,200 hours total time on the engine, 3 major overhauls in that time. We have another engine here, 1,700 hours, 3 major overhauls in that time. 2,300 hours, 3 major overhauls in that time. 230 hours since major overhaul, 448 since major overhaul, 139 hours since major overhaul. And then the fourth engine is down here. Total engine hours, 1,007 hours, 3 major overhauls in that 1,000 hours. Oxygen sample. What else do we have? Again, pilot information or pilot logs. Route of flight. Dover, Lajes, priority. Yep, 50,000 pounds. Okay. Keep going. Again, feel free to pause. Again, here's the crew. Here's the route of flight. Direct Leesburg, Sea Vortac, Shad intersection. They did not make the Shad intersection. Weather. Here's the weight and balance for 1611. This aircraft took off 274,000 pounds. That's just incredible. 274,000 pounds. This is what was on 1611. Now, it is classified. We're not ever going to know what was in the trailers. But there were 2 trailers on board. They were chained down. They have a specific diagram for how they were chained down. There were some issues with the securing of the cargo. But again, you can see we have 8 25,000-pound chains forward, 6 25,000-pound chains aft, 8 25,000-pound chains vertical and lateral. So they're not kidding. I do not think cargo shifted on this aircraft with all the 25,000-pound chains that they're using. Again, opinion. Let me spin this around. Here is the radio communications between the tower and 1611. Now, this is interesting. Okay, ATC clears mat 1611, the Lajes Airport via direct Seal, Shad intersection. They're giving them clearance. Okay, they've taken off their climbing. Climb maintain 17,000. Okay, now there's something interesting here. 1611 calls in and says, Roger, New York, 611 is out of 13. Is 13,000 available? Okay, so they check and they tell them, we'll accept clearance to maintain 13,000. So for some reason, this pilot wants to stop climbing. They come back and they tell them they'll have to get approval. Roger. So now the tower comes back and says, Mats 71611, be advised, 3000 is not available in the ocean area, to which 1611 responds, Roger. Now, we don't know. Why did the pilot want to stop at 13,000 feet? Was there an issue developing? But we'll never know. So they tell him again, report reaching 17,000. The pilot responds, Roger, we'll report reaching 17,000. Over. And that was the last thing that he said. Now, who knows if he could have got approval for 13,000, gained some airspeed, throttled back some, who knows? And again, this is all opinion. This is my opinion based on, nothing. I'm not an expert in this field. But it just seems odd. This pilot wanted to stop climbing at 13,000 feet for some reason and had to keep climbing to 17,000. And that was the last radio report they got from 1611. Again, we'll just go through here if any of this is pertinent. In here, they talk about they're trying to chain these trailers down, and they're not sure of the exact way to do it. So they had to have somebody come out from the manufacturer to show the crew exactly how to chain down these trailers. We don't know what was in the trailers. It's classified. We don't need to know what was in the trailers. It's frankly, none of our business. I mean, it doesn't matter because we're not going to know. We're interested in the fact that there were these big giant trailers and chains on 1611 because circumstantial, yes, but we don't see that on the bottom of the ocean. A lot of that stuff was drug off, absolutely, but man, we're not seeing anything from that loading diagram on the bottom of the ocean. Here they're having, again, don't forget they found fragments after this crash. They're having them tested by the FBI to see if, I guess, there was any explosive material or whatever. So they sent them to the FBI to have it tested. Again, you can read that if you like. Irrelevant for our purposes. All right, I promised you a map, and here it is. So we've spoke about the distance 1611 should, coulda, woulda been versus 2002. You can see on the map here, I hope this comes across okay on the screen, but you can see on the map here, known crash site. I have the 138 radial marked out from Sea Isle Vortac to the Shad intersection, which is the radial that they were allegedly flying on. The crash site that we located is 4.7 miles off that radial. That is not a big discrepancy for 1960s navigation technology. If they cut a corner somewhere from the Vortac, or it's negligible distance from that, from those standards. Today's standards certainly would be a little bit different. So what we did is I ran some quote simulations. I knew that those airplanes climbed at approximately 177 knots. I took off from Dover. You fly to the Sea Isle Vortac. You're climbing the whole time. We're estimating airspeeds. That's what you'll see with simulations, because we're desperate, right? Desperate to determine, to use that information from the investigation reports to somehow identify which aircraft this is with circumstantial evidence, because we have no physical evidence that we know of. So I ran some simulations. Again, I come up a little bit short of where the known crash site is for 2002. 1611 is about 4.7 miles past it, the simulated spot. So I'm just trying to use everything at my disposal to try to figure this out. And one of the things that we do have was the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Cherokee recovers debris, 2 different locations. So you can use that. You know the currents and you know the wind speed at the time. You can use that set and drift and then back plot, which lends itself that 1611. So 1611 flew for 4 minutes longer. 1611 should have been further out to sea. And again, debris was recovered. So that lends itself to our wreck site being 2002, which, remember, we all already think that it probably is, but we want to prove it. So if we can't come up with one piece of smoking evidence, smoking gun, we want maybe we have 10 pieces of circumstantial that point to it. So I mapped out their search grid. The aircraft, coincidentally, was right in the middle of their search grid. I believe that the aircraft went in so hard that it was in a million pieces, that was indistinguishable by sonar in 1963, because it was right in the middle of it. I think they were just limited by technology. Today's standards, we could barely find it at all with all the modern technology. So for 1963, for them not to be able to find it, if that aircraft went in hard, which I think it did, we'll talk about that more later, I think that is likely. So here's the map, and again, I backplotted some stuff for 1611. We think our wreck is probably 2002. Can't prove it. I'm going insane. I think it was like a year and a half, 2 years. I just can't let it go. I go back and I look over this stuff again and again and again and again. I'm looking over all the pictures of the artifacts. I'm just genuinely being driven nuts by this. I can't stand the fact that we're the only ones that know this is here. We're the only hope that that these guys have for positive identification of airmen. So I just keep going through it over, again, year and a half, 2 year time period. I just keep looking through and looking through and looking through and talking to anybody I can think of. And at some point on a Tuesday night, we'll say, it was a weeknight, I'm reading through the accident reports again, and I see this, and it stands out this time for some reason. You'll notice at the top of this page, they refer to this aircraft as C-133A, production number 17. This is the only place in any of the documentation that I've found where they refer to this aircraft as production number 17. So they have the manufacturing number, the serial number, the tail number, all these different numbers do not line up with anything on any of the artifacts. We can't get historical documents from Douglas. We can't get them from Boeing. They don't exist. We can get nothing. Here is this aircraft referred to, the serial number 2008, production number 17. Here is the production list for C-133s. And if we scroll down, there's a couple things I want to point out here, but you'll notice serial number 2002 was production number 17. Now, this was a far-flung production list that I found online somewhere. It was the only place in there that 2002 was referred to as production number 17. So, and the other thing to take note of is the early aircraft had a T-34-P-7WA engines on them. Later aircraft had T-34-P-9W engines on them. We'll talk more about that later. 2002 production number 17. Here's a slide from my PowerPoint presentation to the Air Force. It's the second clue on this slide, but it's our first clue on this video. Stamped on one of these pieces of metal from the Douglas manufacturing is production number 17. So I'm really mad at myself. I'm excited. It took, 2 years to discover that, we had this documentation already. The artifacts were at the Air Force, yes, but we documented them all. Production number 17 on one piece of metal that came off the wreck. So what do? You go back through all the pictures again. Here is a leather-bound booklet of some sort. That's hard to make out in this picture, but it says Dover AFB at the top, and it has an inspection stamp that reads. Now, we went back to the Air Force to talk to them to present evidence. They had these artifacts. We looked at them again. When these artifacts dried out, these dates were legible. Here you have August 14th, 1963. I know it looks like a 9, but it's just mung from the bottom of the ocean on it. This leather-bound thing, I'm almost certain I pulled out of that life raft. I think this is when the life raft was repacked. August 14th, 1963. Another smoking gun. Why is that important? Well, obviously 1611 was already missing in 1963, so the book could not have been stamped. Per the accident report, 2002's last periodic inspection was signed off in September 9th, early September 1963. Is it plausible the aircraft periodic inspection took several weeks? It's very plausible. I am sure that it did take several weeks. We need evidence as to what this leather-bound inspection book was for. I'm almost certain that came out of I can't find evidence. Hopefully somebody watching this says, oh yeah, I remember we used to stamp those and put them in the life rafts. I'm almost positive that's where it came from, but if somebody watching knows, tell us please where this book came from. So we have a date stamp that could not have been stamped on 1611 because it was already gone. So again, smoking gun number 2. So it's late on a Tuesday night, and what do? I call Eric. Probably 11 or so at least. Eric, I got it. I walk him through the whole thing. Front to back. 6 ways of Sunday. Just, holy shit, I think you got it. So what do we do now? By now it's probably 12:30. Let's call Jeff. So we FaceTime Jeff. He's sound asleep in bed with his wife. He wakes up. We FaceTime him. We walk him through the whole thing on the screen. Do you buy this? Now, he knows a little bit about this, but we wanted an outside opinion. He doesn't know any of the details. We walk him through start to finish why this has to be this airplane. And Jeff, who's very experienced with identifying sunken things on the bottom of the ocean, says, you have it. You did it. It is 2002. You have found it. I agree. After all this time, we have finally figured out which airplane it is. So now what? Eric calls Dover. We get another meeting with Dover. January 17th, 2023. Go down to Dover. We have Rusty and Eric on video chat. We meet with the Air Force again. I'm purposely leaving the Air Force personnel's names out of this. This is their story to tell if they want to. We don't speak for the Air Force. That's for sure. And so I'm purposely being vague on that. We meet with the Air Force. We got this whole PowerPoint presentation. We present the entire PowerPoint presentation. They had a gentleman there from AFMAO, Air Force Mortuary Affairs. Again, I'm not speaking for the Air Force. There was some conversations about the possibility of human remains still being there. Now, that's a touchy subject, obviously. But we spoke before about the scallop dredges that go through there. We spoke briefly about the condition we think this airplane was in to begin with. It is our opinion, it is my opinion, the possibility of there being any remains there to find, I think, are extremely, extremely slim. I think if you go to the wreck site today in 2026, you might not find anything at all. You might not find any wreckage left at this point. It's just been run over so hard by all those draggers and everything. You know, I'm saying this to convey that there was a concern in the Air Force as far as that possibility went. My opinion on the subject was that, you know, it would be very difficult to be able to work at that depth. And I just, looking at the video, even, you know, I just don't suspect that there's really going to be anything there for them to recover. But I think it was important that was a concern of theirs. So we present everything to the Air Force, and we're just waiting for them to be like, oh my God, you're right. We don't get that. They are very professional. They say, thank you. We appreciate all that. And that was that. Very, very welcoming, very nice. They treated us like $1 million, and we're just some wacko Northeast wreck divers. You know, they were extremely good to us. So that's that. We presented to the Air Force. I think the general feeling from everybody was that they agreed, but you know, that was that. So we wait. We certainly want to tell the story. We want to get it out to people so that they know where their loved ones are. There were 10 airmen on this aircraft. We don't want to step on the Air Force's toes. So we wait. We check in. It just doesn't seem like there's, anything going on. For whatever reason, we don't know why, and I'm not here to judge anybody for it. The Air Force doesn't really do anything with it. I guess maybe their feeling was they already knew it was missing. They already knew a crash. They knew the airmen were deceased, and there was nothing new to report. So we give it time. I think, I think there was a good 9 months or so. You got to remember, our last meeting with the Air Force was 2021. I think we gave it a lot of time for them to send it up their chain of command, for them to make a decision if they agreed or not, for them to decide what that even means. We didn't hear anything. We didn't do anything. We didn't say anything. We didn't release it. They didn't tell us we couldn't release it, but we didn't find that it was proper to release it if they were going to do something. So we gave it some time. I guess after 9 months, a year or so, I guess, there was always some talk. There was going to be a book, or there was going to be a big show. There was going to be a National Geographic article. All these different things were going to be to tell this story and get it to a bigger audience. The goal was get this to the biggest audience possible, because these guys deserve for people to know their story and what happened to them. There was always some next big thing that was going to come up, and that went on for probably about a year. I let it go too long, if I'm being honest. I have an apology to make for everybody involved here, but it went on that way for a solid 2 years. The next big thing, there's going to be a story, an article, a TV show, or whatever. Bigger audience, better for the crew, bigger audience. Okay. Well, nothing materialized. So 2024 rolls around. It's actually July of 24. I quit diving. And I kind of left this story in some hands that I hoped that was going to be an article. I hoped it was going to be something that would get some recognition for these airmen. Not just the airmen of 2002, but 1611 as well. I mean, they're the same story. And here it is again. So now it's 2 years later after that, and there's nothing. There's always talk of another TV show or whatever. And I feel at this point that this information is not to be kept for a TV show, for personal gain, for this. We should have released this as soon as we got the Air Force's approval. There's families out there that should have known about their loved ones' location a long time ago, and that's my fault, and I apologize for that if you have family on this aircraft, or 1611 for that matter. Then you can blame me for that. I let that go way too long. There was always another plan, a better plan. We tried to find 1611. If you have a boat and a little bit of patience, it can be found. It's out there. I have a good idea where it might be. But again, I'm not going to put the blame on anybody else. It's my own fault. Should have released this information a long time ago. So, but all I can do is release it now. So here it is, 2026. And we have it now. A little bit of speculation. We were talking about what may have made these aircraft crash. So here at the end, let's have a little bit of speculation on what I think. Now, mind you, remember, I am an expert of nothing. My opinion, looking at the accident reports, further modifications done to the C-133s. They changed the engines later in their life. They made some modifications to the engines. They added wing stall strips to the wings. They discovered that the airplane would dip a wing when it stalled. They discovered maybe these engines were being run a little bit too hard. So combination of things that changed after this were, again, engine modifications and wing stall strips installed. So my suspicion, my amateur complete opinion, is that these aircraft were climbing a little too steep. Their airspeed was probably a little bit slow. The engines were running a little bit too hard. If you had an engine failure at a high angle of attack and a low airspeed, if you had a propeller runaway at a low airspeed, a high angle of attack, if you had an issue and that airplane did stall, there's nothing you're going to do with those weights involved with that much cargo. I think it's likely that 1611 and 2002 experienced some type of engine malfunction, whether it was engine failure, whether it was propeller runaway. You know, there was a C-133 that had a double engine failure and made it back to base. Why? Because they weren't climbing; they were descending into Dover. I think it's a plausible scenario that they were climbing, that they experienced some sort of engine malfunction, whether it's engine failure, prop runaway. I think it's possible that the airplane stalled, it dipped a wing, and you're talking about 270,000 pounds of airplane now being pointed at the ocean from 14,000 feet. I think that was very plausible as to what may have happened here, judging by the modifications that were later made, would lend itself to something like this. I think the crew would be very busy in that scenario, and I'm not sure that they would be able to communicate what was going on to the tower. This type of scenario also could explain why, again, 2002 was right in the middle of the search area that they were looking for with the sonar in 1963. I think if the aircraft went in that hard, that there's not going to be much for that sonar of 1963 to be able to make out on the bottom. So that lines up in my head. Again, it's just an opinion. Everybody's got one. They all stink. But, in my head, I have to try to look at this and see what may have happened. And that's what makes the most sense in my amateur investigation mindset. So we've come to the end. Tomorrow is 4th of July. Happy 4th of July, everybody. I thought it was a fitting time to tell this story. And I'll end the video with the names and some pictures of the airmen. I apologize in advance. I don't have pictures of the crew from 1611, but we'll list their names there. And again, sincerest apologies for this being 2021 to now, before this information is out here. But hopefully this will find somebody that needs to hear it, needs to see it, needs to read it, and they can remember one of their loved ones on the 4th of July.